All right, folks. Well, welcome back to Virgin Most Powerful Radio. You're listening to the Dr. Sandoval Show. As always, I am your host, Dr. Sandoval, and today we're talking about healing with the precious blood. Is this possible? Is this real? You know, one of the times sometimes we think, we take the Eucharist for granted more than anything. I mean, that's how I'll say it. I know I have. Sometimes I still do, probably. I don't think about it the way I should. What am I doing? I'm going to go receive the body and blood of Christ. You know what I'm doing while I'm trying to receive the Eucharist? Sometimes I'm thinking, how's my kid doing? Are they paying attention? What are they crying about now? What's happening? Why are they upset? Who's touching who? Don't do that. There's a lot of things that go on that can be easy distractors for us as we're about to receive the Eucharist. It's hard sometimes to really get centered in Christ. I say centered. A lot of people say, oh, centering prayer, that's bad. No, thinking about Christ, centering my mind on Christ, realizing where my salvation comes from, and realizing what it is that's going to happen in that moment, realizing that I'm going to go receive the precious body and blood of Christ. Well, I guess one of the questions that I would say is, what would we do if there was no more medication? Natural disasters, something terrible happens. What's the first thing that happens? We see, oh, there goes the Red Cross. And the Red Cross is going to go give. What's the Red Cross known for? They're always asking for donations. They're saying, please give blood. We need blood. Why? Because in an emergency situation, when there's natural disasters and when there's unfortunate tragedies that happen, first thing we want to do is we want to have blood, and we want to have all types of blood. Why? Because people need different types, right? Are you type A, type B, type O, AB, whatever it is? We want to make sure we have the right blood for the right people. Okay. We see the Red Cross. They're going to get out there. They're going to give medicine, and that's what they're asking for. Do we ever find ourselves in a spiritual crisis? And are we willing to receive the blood of Christ? It's an interesting concept when we think about it. What would happen if there was no more Red Cross? What would happen if there was no more Eucharist? Well, folks, that's what happened, right? So think back to our quarantine, and all the churches closed down. Near me, if anybody's listened to my show, you know that the Catholic Byzantine church near me was open, and that's where we started going. And we said, hey, they're open. This means something. Let's keep going here, because they are not going to close down in a state of quote unquote emergency. So that's important to consider. Which priests are still willing to say, look, you need the Eucharist. That's all there is to it. What if there is none, though? Because before I found that church, there was none. What do you do? Where do you go? Do you even care, though? That's really the question. Do we get to a point where we say, oh my goodness, I really need this. I need the blood of Christ. I need the Eucharist. I need the body of Christ. And now I don't have access to it? What's going to happen? Am I prepared for this or not? Well, that's what happened to us, folks. How many of us were shocked by that? How many of us were thinking, I never imagined this would happen? Living in Southern California, in the Los Angeles area, the Orange County area, the San Diego area, we are overflowing with churches. We have masses going on all the time. Any Sunday, you can find a mass anywhere, even if you have to drive to it. Let's say that the local church near me, I missed the mass because it was at noon. Well, a few miles down the road, I'm sure there's going to be a mass at 1 somewhere, or 2, or 3, or 4. There's always going to be a mass. Am I willing to go get the spiritual food? Do I understand the value of it? There's different people who do and different people who don't. But I had a patient who, during the quarantine, really was struck by not being able to receive the Eucharist, because he really loved the Eucharist. It wasn't that he took it for granted before. It was one of these things where going to Mass was one of these situations where he said, wow, I found this great church. I really like the priest. I like the people. I think it's a great fit for me. A lot of times people are looking for, I want to find the right spiritual home. I want to find the right church for me because of the personality. Now, me personally, as long as I'm going to receive the Eucharist, if I'm on vacation or whatnot, if this is a Roman Catholic church, or I should say a Catholic church, Roman Catholic, Eastern Rite Catholic, as long as it's a Catholic church under the authority of the Pope, I'm on vacation. Let's go receive Jesus. That's the body and blood of Christ. And I want to receive the body and blood of Christ. And that's what happened to this gentleman. When all the churches closed down, when he saw that his priest, who he had full faith in, said, no, I'm sorry, I can't give the Eucharist out anymore. I can't listen to confessions. Churches closed down. That was a shocker. He had not imagined, he had thought, this is the perfect place for me. This is where I'm going to continue until my dying day. And I'm going to have a wonderful spiritual life. And I'm not going to have to worry about anything else. But the key to this is that the spiritual life for this person was based not on Christ. It was based on personalities. It was based on other people. It was, and not that we shouldn't be charitable to other people, of course. And I want to be nice to anybody who's around me. But for him, it was, this is the building, this is the personalities, this is the people. And yeah, that can inspire us to have what we think is a good spiritual life. I'm not going to make any suppositions. Everybody thinks they have a good spiritual life. But what he realized was, wow, the priest who I admired, who I thought this was, who I was putting my faith in this priest and not in Christ, because all of a sudden his eyes were open and he said, this priest has to follow rules from his bishop. And if he's going to close down the church, I feel so disappointed in this priest. That was his reaction. But then he came to the realization of, wow, this priest he's just a human being. Yes, he has the holy orders and we respect that. Absolutely. But he's a human being who has to follow orders from another human being. What am I going to church for? What am I upset about? Am I upset that I can't talk to this priest? Am I upset that I'm not hanging out with my congregation, once a week? Do we turn Mass into a club? This is a hangout. I'm going to go hang out for an hour. And while I'm there, they have communion, but I get to go hang out. I get to see people. I get to say hi to people. And it was a good Mass because my friends showed up and we were able to have a coffee afterwards and talk. That was a good Mass. Or it was a good Mass because the priest gave a good homily. So that was a good Mass. No, he started to realize, wait a minute, what am I doing? What am I missing here? All of a sudden, these people are gone. Priest is gone, but my Eucharist is gone. I can't receive the body and blood of Christ. This is a serious problem. Why did I come to meet this person? Because they fell into a depression. They fell into a depression during the quarantine because they said, I never thought I wouldn't be able to receive communion. But more importantly, I didn't know that that's what I was going to church for. Yes, obviously, consciously, he knew he was going to church then he was going to receive communion. But he gained insight. He gained spiritual insight into the fact that going to Mass was to focus on the Eucharist, to receive the body and blood of Christ. That's kind of what it took. To him, he said, I was at first I was so upset about this quarantine, all the churches closing down and, all these things happening because I couldn't hang out with my friends. That's what I was upset about. I wasn't upset that I was being negated the body and blood of Christ. Are we at the point where we say, I absolutely need to receive the body and blood of Christ? I don't know who the priest is, but I know that the transubstantiation of the bread and wine will be the same regardless of who the priest is. Maybe the graces that are flowing might be different. Maybe if it's a priest who's really trying to lead a good, holy life, I might get more inspired graces because there's an element of faith that goes into it. But the transubstantiation is going to happen regardless. This is where, can a sinful priest forgive my sins? Absolutely. Can a bad doctor give me good medicine? Absolutely. Can a sinful priest still have transubstantiation, still consecrate the bread and the wine to the body and blood of Christ? Absolutely. It's not about the priest. Am I receiving Christ? Am I focused on the right things when I go to church? Am I focused on, especially in this month of July, the blood of Christ and the purpose of the blood of Christ? I think one of the challenges, though, is that it doesn't always feel real to us because as I'm receiving it, it still tastes like bread, still tastes like wine. But when it's taken away, let's just use the example of the quarantine time. I can go to the supermarket and I can buy myself bread. I can even get unleavened bread and I can buy myself some wine. I can drink it and I can think of Jesus all I want, but that's still just bread and wine. Nothing changed at all. I can pray over it. I'm not a priest. I can pray over it as many times as I want. Nothing changed. I don't have that power. That power has not been given to me through holy orders. I need a priest to do that. Absolutely. So when I go to church, I hope there's a priest there. That's what I need. I hope that there is a consecration. What's happening at that consecration, though? Am I focused on, is this the body and blood of Christ? The priest says the words, something happened. And I think that that's where I got to be a little bit more in awe, and this is what I tell anybody who comes to me for deliverance, are you impressed by the fact that there's the body and blood of Christ right there in the tabernacle? Yeah, so this person spoke in different languages, or this person said that they were possessed, or, maybe they were influenced by something dark. Yeah, that can happen. Is that what's going to impress me? Or am I going to look at the precious blood of Christ and realize, wow, that's the price of my salvation. There's a relationship here. I want a relationship with Jesus Christ. That's how I'm going to be saved. I don't want a relationship with the dark side. I really don't. But a lot of people will get so fascinated by reading about, listening to, have to read every book on deliverance and exorcisms, have to listen to every story, every podcast, and have this great focus on that, thinking that, you know what, I really need to fight the devil. And they forget, no, what I really need to do is refresh my soul with Christ. Because what's the point? What's the point of fighting the devil if I'm not with Christ? If I don't have a relationship with Christ, am I preparing myself to go to heaven? This is the price of my salvation, the precious blood of Christ. I look at that and I say, when I go to church, what am I expecting? What am I expecting to see? I think I'm going to see as much as I allow myself to see with the eyes of faith. A lot of times we get excited. Father, how many demons have you expelled? How many exorcisms have you been at? What is it like? Ooh, wow, look at that. The real question is, Father, how many times have you seen a soul transformed to love Christ more when you're in the confessional? What does it feel like when you're up there at the altar and this turns into the body and blood of our God? It's hard because, we look at the news, we look at what's going on around us. We see the frustrations among the Catholic world. We hear different things, our faith is going to be challenged in certain ways. The Pope is saying this, or bishops are saying things contrary to our faith, what we know to be the truth and the deposit of the faith. Holy bishops, like my favorite bishop, Bishop Strickland, my favorite bishop, America's bishop, are being questioned, investigated because they're speaking about the deposit of the faith, or they're standing up for the Catholic faith. Am I going to be questioned because I'm going to stand up for the Catholic faith as I know it, as it came through Christ and the apostles? Am I listening to priests who have their own opinion or are actually talking about the salvation of my soul and what's important for my soul? Or, are they talking about, you don't have to worry about these parts of the catechism? It's a struggle, really, at the end of the day. Where do I put my focus? How do I know what to do? How do I know what's good for my soul? I don't want to be led in the wrong direction. This is why we say, I want a good Catholic therapist. I want a good Catholic doctor. I want a good Catholic priest. You would never think that we'd have to ask for that. I want a good Catholic priest. Really what we're saying is I want a priest who is going to show me the way to Christ, who's going to give me the truth, who's not going to give me their opinion. But when they put on that collar, they no longer have their opinion. They only have the opinion of Christ, because that's what I want. Ultimately, I want Christ. Every time we go to church, I got to think to myself, it's not about the building or the people around there. Sure, if people are nice, I want to be nice to people, and I hope that they're nice as well. But when I get there, the reality is I want Christ. I want the Eucharist. Sometimes we forget, though, that Christ is still working. Christ is very real. It's easy to forget that, not just because we see the shocking tragedies in the world or the challenges to our faith, but more than anything else, because, the Eucharist is all around us all the time, that we forget that it's a miracle in and of itself. The Eucharist is a constant miracle. It's happening every single day, every hour of the day, all around the world. It's a constant miracle that's always happening. We get jaded. We get used to it. We say, oh, yeah, it's there. Oh, yeah, it's happening. But sometimes it's good to hear about different miracles. And this is where I really enjoy when I read about, look, there in this place of the world, all of a sudden, there's a Eucharistic miracle. Let's look at some of these. Let's look at some of these Eucharistic miracles and see what we're talking about. This reminds me that the blood of Christ is happening now, that Calvary is happening now every time we're at church, that Jesus has not left us, that, he's working in our lives, and I have to take that step back and stop trying to control God's will. I want to do God's will, but I'm going to let him know what it is. Happens all the time. God, I'm going to do your will, and this is what your will is for me. This is how I'm going to lead my life because this is what you want for me. Am I willing to take that spiritual step back and say, I know what I want, but I'm going to wait to see what God does for me. I'm going to wait to see patiently, what direction is God moving me in? It's hard to do sometimes. It's hard to do. But let's look at a few miracles. Here's a few that show us that the Eucharist is real, that it's really the blood and body of Christ. In Lanciano, Italy, in the 8th century, around 750, it says, the miracle of Lanciano involved a priest who experienced doubts. Isn't that all of us? That's human. We can experience doubts. Is it a sin? No, we got to ask for faith. It's a sin to not ask for faith. If I'm experiencing doubts, I better get ready to ask for faith. It says he was experiencing doubts concerning Jesus' actual presence in the Eucharist. As he was leading the Mass, he began to recite the words of the consecrated blood found in 1 Corinthians, right? As we usually hear, he said, this is my body and this is my blood. He witnessed the wine and the bread turn into the real human blood and flesh. The blood then coagulated into 5 globules, which represented the 5 wounds of Christ. Real blood, wine doesn't coagulate, blood will. Word spread rapidly of this miracle, and the flesh and blood remain preserved to this day, and you can actually go visit them at the Lanciano's Church of San Francesco. One day I want to do a pilgrimage. That would be great to do a Eucharistic pilgrimage. You know, I'm going to the church, not because of the building, not because of who the priest is. I don't know who the priest is at that church. I'm going there because I want to see the body and blood of Christ, and I want to see it in actual body and blood form. That's kind of cool. Not because I doubt, but because as human beings, isn't that what we want? You know, you take a kid to a toy store, and the first thing they want to do, or the first thing I tell my kids is don't touch anything. They want to go touch it. They want to experience it. I think this is where we get that inspiration. I think this is why Christ allows this to happen, because he's saying, I'm letting you know this is real, but sometimes you need to experience it. Sometimes we're doubting Thomases. And is that a bad thing? Well, I think I wouldn't say it's a bad thing. I'd say it's human, but I think it's a bad thing if we don't stop and say, gosh, I'm having doubts, or I'm not thinking about it as real as I want to. I better start praying for faith. When we forget to pray for faith, hope, and love, we got to pray for those. They're not just going to come to us. We got to ask for it. If I forget to ask for it, if I don't stop and say, God, I want some faith, that's where we're going to fall short. I wouldn't say bad, but it makes us take steps backwards. We got to keep praying for faith. Let's look at the next miracle. Bolsena, Orvieto, Italy. This was in 1236. The miracle of Bolsena, Orvieto appeared to a priest who doubted the doctrine of the Transubstantiation. Again, transubstantiation meaning changing of the bread and the wine into the body and blood of Christ. And what happened to this priest? During communion, he doubted about this during communion. After he had consecrated the Eucharist, the host began bleeding onto the altar's liturgical cloth. At the exact moment, the priest ran and confessed his sin of doubt to the Pope, who was visiting the town at the time. The liturgical cloth remains on display in the Cathedral of Orvieto, where people visit to venerate and honor the sign of one of the earliest Catholic Eucharistic miracles. For the priest, it might be more of a sin to doubt. You know, he says he went to go confess his sin of doubt. It'd be interesting to ask, is it a sin for me to doubt? Could be as a Catholic. I mean, if anybody has an answer, feel free to email me, let me know. But definitely for a priest, that's what you signed up for. This is my faith. I can't doubt that. Let's look at another Eucharistic miracle. So this one is in Cassia, Italy in 1330. It says, while most people know Cassia as a place to pay homage to St. Rita, great saint. If anybody doesn't know about St. Rita, you know, patron saint of impossible causes, go ahead and read about that. It is also the location of a Eucharistic miracle. A priest was preparing to visit a dying parishioner a short way from Siena. During his preparations, instead of putting a pyx in his prayer breviary, he placed a consecrated host instead. So he just put the host in his breviary. After arriving at the dying parishioner's house, he heard his confession and absolved him of his sins. Then he opened his breviary, only to find that the host had bled, staining both pages with blood. One of those pages remains in Cassia today. That would be definitely interesting to see. You put a host in there, the host just looks like bread. This is a reminder when we are receiving the Eucharist, even if we don't receive from the chalice, that bread alone is the body and blood of Christ. It's all contained there. Amsterdam, Holland. In Amsterdam, in 1345, a devout Catholic man who had fallen ill desired to receive communion. His family notified their local priest, who, after administering the sacrament, told the family to burn the sacraments in the fire should the sick man throw up. He did throw up that evening, and his family cast this purged Eucharist into the fire, because obviously if he received communion, but he's going to throw up, the priest is saying, let's be reverent about this. Let's not throw it away. Let it burn, but let it burn in the fire. The next morning, the man's wife looked into the fire and saw the host back in its original form. Not fearing for her safety, she reached in and retrieved the host. Besides retracting her hand unscathed from the fire, the host itself was cold to the touch. Despite plunderings and attempts to remove the host from the city, it miraculously remained there for several hundred years until the church was torn down and the miraculous host was lost in the early 1900s. Well, these are older miracles. Do we have any newer miracles? Because we can say, gosh, these miracles happened a long time ago. There's a few newer ones. Let's look at the newest one. I'm going to put a link to this article on the video here on the bottom. But this one's from Poland in 2013. It says, it was Christmas Day when Monsignor, I'll say Monsignor K, I can't pronounce his last name, picked up a consecrated host that had accidentally fallen to the floor. 2013. He placed it in water to dissolve. That's what we do. Host falls on the ground. You place it in water, you let it dissolve, and you put it down the holy sink in the sacristy. Suddenly, a reddish color appeared on the consecrated host. Testing ensued, and with results finding that the host contained striated tissue from a human heart. Other findings also posit that the tissue showed similar signs as those seen in tissue after the agony of death. Today, the Eucharistic miracle is on display in a small shrine, and that is in Legnica, Poland. That was a miracle from 2013. That was, 11 years ago. It's still happening today. Well, I was taken aback a little bit, and I'm still waiting to see what the results are. There was a Eucharistic miracle that apparently occurred here in the United States this year. I don't know if anybody heard of this, but there's an article here, shocking Eucharistic miracle being investigated in the United States. What is this Eucharistic miracle? Body and blood of Christ, month of July, precious blood. This happened in the Archdiocese of Hartford, Connecticut. And this article says the Archdiocese of Hartford, Connecticut is investigating a possible Eucharistic miracle that occurred on March 5th. As I hear about these miracles and they're happening today, it's a reminder to me, what's a reminder to me more than anything else as far as spiritual health and mental health? To worry a lot less. Really, more than anything else, why worry less? God is still happening. Miracles are still happening. And these miracles happen without me doing anything. It's going to happen in God's time. Why am I so worried about certain things? I got to do this. I got to do that. I get to here. I got to finish this. I got to do this project. These things happen. Am I taking the time to worship God right now in this moment? Am I willing to say, God's going to take care of this? Even if it seems like things aren't well, if I don't have an open door somewhere, God's going to give me the keys to somewhere else. Do I have that level of faith? That brings me peace when I think about that. God is still working in my life. The main question is, am I letting him? Am I letting him? Am I stepping aside and saying, okay, God, you lead, I follow? That's the question of the day. Well, what is this miracle that occurred on March 5th, right here in Connecticut, in the United States? It says a priest at St. Thomas Catholic Church in Thomaston, Connecticut, had recently claimed a Eucharistic miracle. What happened was the minister who was handing out the Eucharist was running out of host. They had actually worried that they weren't going to have enough for the congregation. And all of a sudden, instead of running out, the ciboria were refilled miraculously. And by the end of Mass, they had the same or even more consecrated hosts as when they started. I really want to hear about this miracle. I want to hear what happened. I want to hear what happened with this investigation. It sounds extremely Christ-like. The multiplying of bread so that everybody could eat. And on top of that, not only multiplying of bread, but there's more than when you started. God is never outdone in his generosity. God will always give us a lot more than when we give him. That's the kind of God we have. Am I ready to accept that God? Is my soul in a condition therapeutically where I'm ready to accept that God? Have I done an examination of conscience and therapeutically gone to confession and say, I don't need anything but the Lord my God and the blood of Christ of my salvation? Until next week, let's keep it Catholic.